Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I want to talk about my new Saturn talismans, but I also want to talk about Saturn in general, because I think it's a very important topic and an incredibly important planet. So Saturn kind of has a bad rap. He's known as the greater malefic, um, and I think there's a tendency for people to be like, oh no, he's bad. And that good bad classification of planets or signs or whatever you want to get into in astrology, that's just way too simplistic. So each planet rules certain areas, each planet has certain gifts, and each planet has its own characteristic problems. And so you just don't want to reject any planet out of hand, particularly Saturn or Mars. Those are considered to be, like I said, the greater malefic is Saturn, lesser malefic is Mars, but that's way too simplistic to be just attaching to everything. The other problem we have is that people are really set up to be scared about anything. They're sort of in a state of like, oh my goodness, the other shoe's going to drop, and the slightest little thing goes wrong, and they're running for the hills. So again, I don't think that's a good attitude to take for astrology. I mean, if that's your approach, that's fine. My approach is to have a little more confidence and a little more less fear about these planets because I deal with them in a devotional and an angelic way. So I'm trying to interface with them at an angelic level. And yes, they do have negative effects, but that's true of life in general. I mean, life is just, we have positives and negatives, and then what's positive and what's negative often depends on the circumstances. So really, if you think about it, the greater benefic is Jupiter, lesser benefic is Venus, but how benefic really are they in some cases? I mean, you end up too much pleasure, too much overindulgence. These planets can actually lead you astray. And that's even when they're in reasonable zodiacal state. So if Jupiter is afflicted or Jupiter rules the eighth house, again, that can be also problematic. It just very much depends on the circumstances. You need to look at the chart and you need to look at the circumstances you're dealing with. So you don't want to have these blanket positive, negative, good, bad views of things. Now, the thing about Saturn is this, is that really Saturn is the great teacher, but he teaches through isolation, through suffering, and also though through contemplation of the deepest mysteries. So let's just dive in a little bit on Saturn and look at what some of our traditional sources have to say about him. So Picatrix, for example, says, ask to Saturn if you're looking for particular effects or you're looking to, you want to know what Saturn rules. He rules old people, generous people, senators, rulers of cities, hermits, those who labor in the earth, inheritances, distinguished men, farmers, builders of buildings, servants, thieves, fathers, grandfathers. Said, if you find yourself in contemplation and sorrow or in melancholy or grave illness, then Saturn is the one that you're going to want to deal with. And then Picatrix, this is Picatrix Books 3, Chapter 7. It goes on to say Saturn is cold and dry. So that's pretty key. Each of the planets has an elemental attribution, and Saturn's is to be cold and dry. That's the earth element. It's also melancholy. When we're looking at the traditional Galenic Western medicine, it's the black bile that produces melancholy. Says he's an infortune. I mean, malefic, again, that's just the standardized. Doesn't mean everything he does is bad, but yes, he does have some negative qualities, that's for sure. Says destructive, the source of bad and foul odors, proud and a traitor, because when he makes a promise, he betrays it. He signifies farmers, streams, those working in the earth, controversies, great and long journeys, great and enduring enmities, bringing evils, battles, and all things unwanted. Says true speech, hope, blackness, age, buildings, fear, great thoughts, cares, angers, betrayals, sorrows, anguish, death, inheritance, orphans, old places, appraisals, proper elocution, secret sciences, secret meanings, and profound knowledge. So you can see there's really a mix here of things. There's a lot of positives, a lot of negatives, and again, it depends on the circumstances. But what I like about these rulerships is that when you read the rulerships that a planet has, you start to build up a sense of the personality of the planet. And that's really my approach. My approach here is to look at the planets as persons, as personalities, and then to build up a relationship with them. But to really build that relationship, you need to understand their personality and you need to be able to work with them. So, one of the things that's interesting that Picatrix says is that obviously retrogradation is a problem. But generally when I'm looking at, for example, just looking at talismans, which is very different from how I would look at someone's natal chart for predictive purposes. I'm looking at their natal chart to see what talismans I would recommend. Then retrograde, if the planet's retrograde in their natal chart, as long as it has some dignity, I'm like, well, I think that's okay. Saturn, Picatrix says, when he's dignified and retrograde is even worse than just being retrograde without dignity. So that's one exception to that. It says, Picture says, when Saturn is retrograde, he signifies misfortune, debilities, infirmities, prisons, and evils. And if he enters into an aspect of another planet, he weakens it and damages it. So obviously not a good. For some reason with Picatrix, it's like it says, when to be dignified in retrograde, so he's got power in retrograde, it's even worse. So obviously someone to be careful with, but not necessarily to run away from, because as I said, there's a lot of positive qualities that go with it. So another way to think about this is what I was talking about with the idea of melancholy. So there's been a lot of writing in sort of contemporary historiography. There's a book, Saturn and Melancholy, that's quite famous. Marsilio Ficino, who is a Renaissance priest, he's also a translator of the Corpus Hermeticum, was founder of the Platonic Academy under the Medici in Florence in the Renaissance. He says about his own natal chart, he says, Saturn seems to impress the seal of melancholy on me from the beginning, set as he is, almost in the middle of my ascendant in Aquarius. So he has Saturn rising in Aquarius. And interestingly enough, so do I. So I'm not saying I'm Marsilio Ficino, but it is interesting to see that, the interest in astrological magic, philosophy, sort of deeper things, and then a tendency to get isolated. I mean, I certainly have that. So again, I was saying Saturn is cold and dry, produces black bile and melancholy, and probably the most obvious result of that is depression and dullness. So there is a tendency for the children of Saturn to fall into depression. But at the same time, as Ficino points out, those who are melancholic are more disposed to intellectual work, are more engaged with the deepest and loftiest forms of contemplation. So a lot of this goes along with the idea of phantasmata, which are sort of mental images, and that melancholics are, again, people under the influence of Saturn are more prone to think in visual images, which is true of me. I really, when I organize things, it really is often in a visual image or is organized visually. But also we have this idea, not just from our own creation of it, but these are images coming from the anima mundi, the soul of the world, sort of the source of talismans. And so the melancholics are really open to receiving this direct influence from the anima mundi, from the soul of the world. And that goes along with the idea that Saturn rules, as Picatrix says, this is in Book 3, Chapter 1, profound sciences, science of laws, seeking out the causes and roots of things and their effects, speaking of miracles, and understanding deep and secret qualities. So as you can see here, while there's a sense of isolation, that can be isolation in a negative way, but also isolation in a positive way. Isolation that produces this serious study, this asceticism, and this deep understanding of the most profound mysteries. So as Saturn was coming into Aquarius, I said, I look ahead, this is, last year basically, and I said, you know what, we have got to make some Saturn and Aquarius talismans because it'll be so strong. So we've gone ahead, and this is the first sort of installment of these, and these we've got some bronze, a Saturn throne talisman in Aquarius, and then also very, very few of these black agate Saturn throne talismans set in sterling silver. So again, only a few of these. If you're looking at this video too much after February 2021, it's probably going to be sold out. But hopefully we'll still have a few more of the Saturn bronze. Again, these will sell out. The price will go up as they go out. But we just had to make these. I mean, plus 10 is incredibly strong for essential dignity. So it's dignified by sign, which is plus 5, by triplicity, plus 3, and then term, plus 2. So a very, very powerful talisman. Don't want to get too carried away with the talisman scores. I mean, plus 4 is going to be able to make that connection, but it is really cool to have that additional dignity. It makes me a little nervous though. People say, I won't buy anything less than plus 7. It's like, you don't want to get too caught up with that. You're going to be able to make an effective connection to the planet, and you don't want to cut yourself out of having the influence. But hey, if you've got a choice, why not go with these really super powerful talismans? Particularly since when I initially offer them, I generally will give a certain amount of discount, and that's the only discounts that I do at Renaissance Astrology. So if you're interested in these talismans, what you want to do is to go to renaissanceastrology.com. It's my website. If you look at the top of the page, it says Talismans. If you go to the Talisman page, it says Currently Available Talismans, and then look at Saturn. So that's really the way to go with those. and check those out. Now, one of the things I should say is that, Saturn and Aquarius, my opinion is, and people differ with me about this, is that you can't control the specific effects of a talisman by doing the election. So somehow if I manipulate the election properly, I'll force the spirit to do certain things, or it has to be this way, or I've constructed it in a particular way. My view is that the election, predominantly what you're doing is you're getting Saturn for a Saturn election. So it's like setting a meeting with a friend. You could go to a specific restaurant, you could force to the zoo, but you're not going to be able to control your friend's behavior that much. I mean, you might influence a little bit. Obviously, maybe at the zoo they're going to be more boisterous or something or whatever, but mostly you're getting your friend. And that's what I would say about these Saturn elections. I mean, Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn in Libra, these are all very strong placements for Saturn, and you're going to get the strong connection to Saturn. I do think there's a little bit of a flavor, and if you have a preference, I can understand, how you want to go for that. But again, don't take that too far, in my opinion. You want to, if you're going to get a Saturn talisman and it's something that you're interested in, you're going to do fine with Saturn in anywhere he's dignified. You'll be able to get that basic Saturn energy. The flip side is people are also afraid of them, like if I make a little mistake in the election, it'll be problematic. Again, no election's perfect, and we really do the best we can to get the best possible elections, all the factors lining up. But again, you don't need to worry about there's a problematic. We've checked these, we've used them many times, and we're getting a nice strong connection to Saturn with them. But like I said, the flavor is very interesting, and I think Aquarius is a particularly intriguing sign. And I have a lot of planets in Aquarius. I said Aquarius rising with Saturn in Aquarius, so it's a sign, it's a modality, so to speak, of Saturn that I have a lot of experience with. Air signs are interesting. They're, from a sort of psychological standpoint, they're more objective. They can stand back from emotions, see them more clearly. But there's also a tendency to be sort of emotionally distant and cold. It's almost a Mr. Spock kind of feeling to it. Aquarians are also interesting too. Have the whole Age of Aquarius, dancing hippie kind of thing, which is there as part of Aquarius. I mean, Aquarians really do love humanity. The problem is they're not necessarily so great with individuals. And that maybe go back to the whole air sign thing. This placement is really good as an air sign for balance. I mean, balance and objectivity are something that goes along with air signs. The thing about Aquarius is that, again, very interesting combination of things. They're friendly but detached, sociable, sort of eccentric, very independent. I think that goes along with the fixed sign. Stubborn, rebellious, just absolutely have to go their own way. I mean, that's just one of my defining characteristics. I've always had to be my own person and go my own way, and how I think, how I act, etc. Which is great, except when it sort of leaves you somewhat isolated, when you're kind of out of touch with what other people are doing. So again, lots of positives and negatives to this. Not easy to make a simplistic view of it. Aquarian can be very scientific and progressive, but also very traditional. So it's like very interesting because the Saturn is, older and goes along with more conventional, traditional things, as well as being iconoclastic. Very interesting. So one of the things I've noticed is that Aquarius is opposite to Leo. And so Leo is a very interesting sign. Someone who's strongly manifesting Leo characteristics has it's almost like a lion or the sun or something. I mean, this is like a king. I mean, somebody who really is the center of attention, insists on being the center of attention, noble and generous, but dominates the situation that they're in, wants to run everything, and really sees things from their own standpoint. I mean, Leo, I have friends who are Leos. It's a great sign, but it also, like I said, they're very, very dominating and not just self-centered, but that's their reality. Now, the interesting thing about it is that Aquarians, you'd think they're opposite to it. Aquarians are very humanitarian. But Aquarians have that similar sort of self-centeredness and also power thing. I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution, that's got an Aquarian flavor to it. They're doing the right thing, but boy, like I said, they'll line you up against the wall and shoot you as a kind of revolutionary if you get in their way for the greater good, of course. But there is this intense power thing that goes along with Aquarius in both a positive and negative way. Power for good, and then power for definitely used for negative purposes. So very interesting placement for Saturn. if you think about elemental qualities, Saturn is cold and dry. So Aquarius being an air sign is hot and wet. It's a very nice balancing uh, placement for him. And that's one of the reasons, for example, in traditional astrology, why the Triplicity rulerships, for example, the air Triplicity is ruled by Saturn by day, because Saturn is moderated in that. His cold and dry nature is moderated by the hot and wet nature of it. So that's, people, often students are confused, like, well, Saturn isn't like this. It's like, it's not like equals like for everything in traditional astrology. One of the principles that's used is also moderating things. So it helps the malefic by moderating it, so that's a good placement for it. So that's why the rulership of certain things goes that way. Saturn, or Mars, for example, being the night ruler of water signs. I mean, Mars is hot and dry, water is cold and wet. Again, Mars is moderated in water. So Aquarius, though, is nice balance for Saturn. I mean, Saturn, like I said, does tend to be somewhat isolated, can be a little miserly and selfish. And so the Aquarian humanitarian side of it is a good balance for him, in helping people on a sort of broad scale. So also the Aquarian has a sort of sense of like big picture. That's one of the things I get with Aquarius is it's a very big picture sign. And there's also an intuitive side of Aquarius as well. Along with Aquarius and Pisces, I think I have a tendency to think of them as sort of old souls, if we're going to be New Age about it. And these are signs that tend to be spiritual, and in a different way, though. Pisces is a much more mystic, emotional side. Aquarius has a really deep, intuitive side, a spiritual side as well. So, I think that's, one of the things that we put as far as the goals of these, or the powers of these talismans, is power. And that certainly goes along with Saturn, but I think Saturn and Aquarius in particular. And we talk about the Aquarian age. The precession of the equinoxes is 26,000 years. Each sign then rules for 2,000 or so years. Moving into the age of Aquarius, there is this tendency to think of it as dancing hippies. Also, the vast networks of command and control, surveillance, facial recognition stuff, software, all that sort of stuff. That's also Aquarian. So again, back to the fact that it's never good, bad. There's always nuance, and there's always some positives and negatives. And again, it's very much positive for what and negative for what. Each of the planets has this personality. So it's very interesting to kind of penetrate into it. So if you're interested in working with Saturn, then, and really you should be. If you have any interest in astrology, traditional astrology in particular, and spiritual growth as well, Saturn is something you want to look at. Like I said, Saturn really is the great teacher. So if you look at your chart, if your Saturn's in Capricorn, Aquarius, or Libra, pretty much that's great. Now, as long as they're not retrograde. If they're retrograde in Capricorn, Aquarius, or Libra, Saturn is, then what I would recommend to you is do a divination. You could do pendulum, you could, do I Ching or tarot or something like that, whatever method works for you, and see how Saturn responds to that. You could also try, for example, a paper talisman, and that's easier to deconsecrate and respectfully dispose of. You can burn it if you do have a problem. But I would do that divination first and see if you get a positive result. So like I said, the retrogradation is kind of funky. Every other planet, if it's, it's Jupiter and Pisces retrograde, it'd be like no problem for talismans. Talismans, as I said, are different. When I'm looking at what I recommend for talismans, that's different from prediction. I don't look at houses, I don't look at aspects. I have kind of my own unique way of doing it. But with Saturn, I'm just a little more careful. And Saturn is often retrograde. So a lot of people have Saturn afflicted in the chart. So also if Saturn is in Cancer, Leo, or Aries, detriment or fall, that's problematic. So what you might want to do is to have me take a look at your chart. If you're serious about getting talismans for Renaissance astrology, I'm happy to look at your chart. Don't just do it for fun, because it does take me some time to do this. But like I said, if you want to get a talisman, if you're thinking about it, definitely you can contact me. If you go to my website, renaissanceastrology.com, hit the contact page and send me an email, include your date of birth, and then I can take a look and give you some suggestions and see whether Saturn's good for you, or give you other suggestions as well. When you think about it, typically what people are looking for from a talisman is money or spiritual protection or love. But for spiritual growth, for occult philosophy, for the deepest knowledge, Saturn really is supreme. If you're serious about your astrological practice, Mercury obviously is something to look at, but Saturn is also co-rules with Mercury, the esoteric arts. and also that deeper knowledge, spiritual growth, and really working with it. I mean, people are nervous about Saturn, and I understand why, but nevertheless, Saturn for the esotericist really is an incredible planet. So you want to check it out, and even if you can't do a talisman, you can always do planetary charity. So again, check that out on my website. Explains how to do planetary charity. And that's something that's worthwhile that anybody can do no matter what the placement of the talisman is. The thing about talismans is they're so concentrated and they're giving you such a direct line. It's nice to make sure that you're on good terms with the planet. Now, even if the planet's afflicted, I've had students that have worked with talismans of planets afflicted in their chart, and they've had some problems, but they reported it was good for spiritual growth. Now, a lot of people don't want any problems at all, so that's why I typically recommend it. But it's not necessarily like it's instant death if Saturn's afflicted in your chart to work with Saturn. Again, you need one to just go carefully, work with it, build up that relationship perhaps through planetary charity, but definitely don't neglect Saturn. Don't make the mistake of saying, oh, this is a malefic, I'm going to run away for it. If you're interested in spiritual growth. Now, if you just want love or you're just looking for money, then no, Saturn's really not necessarily the planet for you. But if you're interested, like I said, in that deeper knowledge and spiritual growth, then really you don't want to neglect Saturn. So again, great to talk about these topics. I think it's very interesting. And as I always say, everything here is my opinion. If you have a different approach, that's great. None of this is, I'm saying is right or wrong. We want to find the approach that resonates for you. But again, check out my website, renaissanceastrology.com. Incredible resources on Saturn, and also courses, readings, and then also our new Saturn talismans.